tips on creating an inclusive team culture. My name is Richard Tucker, and I am joining you all from Brooklyn, New York, as a multiverser. I serve as our senior coach onboarding lead, where I oversee the incredible learning and development experience our coaches go through. And in my free time, I love live experiences. You can catch me at a concert, most likely at Broadway, anywhere I can be as long as I can get a cheap ticket. But I'll be your host today, and I'm super excited to introduce the beautiful faces you all here that you see here today, who will be our panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Sean Chen.
Hey everyone, my name is Sean Chen. I go by Chen, and I happen to be the interim DEI program manager at Multiverse. I've been with Multiverse now for the last 2 years and really excited. And I'll just hop into some fun facts. So one of the things that I'll share is that I have a passion for dance, specifically bachata, hip hop. Anytime you want to get to the dance floor, please let me know. I think that is the way that I get to celebrate diversity. And I'm really excited to be here today. I'll pass it on over to Ifoma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ifoma Woke, and I have been at Multiverse for 2 years. I'm currently the Digital Business Accelerator Apprenticeship Program lead. And in terms of what I do outside of Multiverse, well, I am basically always trying to get in touch with my inner hippie. So you will see me at a farmer's market. You will see me hiking in the woods. You will see me eating kale. And I know my friends make fun of me because of that, but that's okay. And I'm really excited to be here today with all of you.
We can pass it over to Jalen.
Welcome all, I'm Jalen. I'm one of our recruiters on our talent team here. I'm calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. My fun fact and really how I spend a lot of my time is I'm a yoga teacher. Apart from being a recruiter, I'm literally sitting in my yoga studio right now. I'm giving you a call from there. Just very excited about wellness and well-being and really excited to share about inclusive practices with you all today.
And last but certainly not least, Tobes.
Hi, so I'm Tobes. I am based here in London, so I'm a multiverser as well. I'm the delivery lead here for functional skills as well. I've been here just under 2 years too. It's a little bit of a pattern with us here. We have such a wonderful DEI team here. So I've previously was a global DEI committee member, and going into some of my interests, like a fun fact, I think my ideal Sunday is putting on some old school reggae, some lovers rock, and some cleaning the house, maybe a cheeky little gym session as well. So that's my interest, that's me.
Well, thank you so much. Clearly, we have an array of many different things. I need to get my yoga on, then I can go to a bachata class, maybe eat some kale, talk to Tobes about diversity. A lot of things happening here, but super excited to spend the next hour with all of you. For the folks joining the call, you all clearly joined today because you fundamentally believe on what we believe. Inclusivity in the workplace is incredibly important. And our goal today really is to do a deep dive into this conversation. We're not going to answer all the questions that we may have. We're not going to talk about all the tips, but really our panelists are coming with their lived experience and the work that they're actively doing in their workplace. To start the call, though, I'd love to share what our panelists sort of put their minds together to say, what are the 5 tips of creating this inclusive workplace? And I'm sharing them at the top of our call because you will see throughout their conversations and the way that they engage in their responses, these living and breathing and all that they say. So our first tip is really about collaboratively building systems for team communication. Second, you're going to see this idea of creating space to identify and discuss biases. Third, highlighting collective expertise, which is similar to what we're doing today. 4, about being big and loud about team victories and self-victories. And then finally, developing that people-first practices, which is going to shine throughout all of these. Again, we're going to return to these tips at the end of our call today, but I wanted to start there as we move into our very first question, which I have queued up here for Chin and Tobes. So my first question for all of you, or for the two of you, is from your viewpoint, how would you define an inclusive work environment. And more specifically, what I'm getting at is, what does an inclusive team look, sounds, and feel like to you? And why are these inclusive ways of working important to you and should be important to others? So we'll start with Chin.
Thanks so much, Richard. I really appreciate it. When I'm thinking about an inclusive culture, there are three things that come top of mind. And I'm really going to try to simplify this because I think that we can all have our different iterations of what inclusivity looks like for us. But when I'm thinking about it, I think about these three items. The first is inviting others into a space. The second is informing others. And then the third is inquiring, right? And not necessarily in that order, but invite, inform, and inquire. I think these three steps really push us to a more inclusive workplace and a more inclusive culture overall. And when I'm thinking about what that looks and feel like in a workplace or in a work team rather, I'm thinking about that individual who might want to be invited into a conference. Maybe they want to be invited into maybe some decision making. And then I'm thinking about that inquire piece, maybe asking them a little bit more about their experiences or their thoughts, whether it's professional or even personal. I think there's so much value there. And then the last piece is actually informing them, right? Keeping that person abreast of whatever the decision that was made. I think those three steps quickly push us into a workplace culture of inclusivity. I'll pass it over to Topes.
They're such good points, Chin. I really, really appreciate that. So if we're talking about what an inclusive team culture looks, feels, sounds like, and kind of putting it in the framing of my tip, which is kind of being big and loud and celebrating your collective victories. I think it's important to think about what this sort of team doesn't look like. And I'll tell you for free, it absolutely doesn't look like a conflict-free zone. No one ever disagrees with another. Everyone has the exact same thinking. They're perfectly aligned and synchronous all of the time. That's absolutely not what a good inclusive team culture looks like. No one comes from the exact same perspective. No one has the exact same experience as the other one. So I think what a truly inclusive team culture really looks like, if you want to be successful and drive together and pull in the same direction, is you need to build up an environment and a culture and a space where everyone can be open, can contribute, can discuss, can have that very natural and normal conflict. But really importantly, you can close that loop and there can be resolutions as well, where you can all now then pull in the same direction and be, well, in a space where you can have those collective victories that you can be big and loud about. So yeah, kind of tying those thoughts back together, it'll allow you to succeed and share all of your struggles, victories, and strategies, given that you've been able to have those experiences together and then be successful.
Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing. I think both of your ideas really lend perfectly to each other, right? This idea of having this team where everyone really isn't the same, right? There's different perspectives and ideas, but having that team also ensure that everyone across that team is sharing each other's names, right? Or going into those rooms and saying, actually, I think Chin is the person who might be really good with this. Let me check with Chin to see how he feels and sort of have that conversation. So thank you both so much for sharing that. I'd love to turn it over to Ifoma and Jalen here. And first, I'd love for you to reiterate, what is your tip that you have that you're sharing? And then secondly, I'd love for you to share specific instances where your strategy or your tip was put into action within your specific team. How would you assess that effectiveness or ineffectiveness of that strategy? And whoever would like to come off first can go.
I'll start off. So my tip was around highlighting collective expertise and thinking about creating an Avengers out of your team. And so when I think about collaborative strategies, I think about the fact that, one, I'm an eldest sibling. And so for those of you who are eldest siblings in the room, it means, one, that you're blamed for everything, but it also means that you struggle with delegation, right? So I've had to push myself as a leader out of that comfort zone of not delegating. And I've really become obsessed with this idea of working groups or pods within a team. So at Multiverse, we have something called technical professional development, where we help coaches upskill in different technical areas. And so when I was a technical lead, I owned that. When I transitioned to a program lead, I needed to delegate that responsibility, and that was challenging for me. But ultimately, I realized I could easily just create a working group, right? Asking people on my team who would be interested, created that working group, and really let them take full ownership over the planning and execution of technical upskilling for our team. And it just felt like a natural thing to do for our team, and quite a few folks stepped up, Chin including. And it was transformational for not only the dynamics, but also an opportunity for folks to really step up as leaders, right? And own something that could contribute to the overall development and growth of our team. And so I think in terms of really determining its effectiveness, I think, one, it's important to collect data, right? Survey team members, having regular working group check-ins, but it's also important to utilize the one-to-ones that you have with team members to just ensure that the work still feels fulfilling, that they're aligned with it, but also there's a space for them to share their ideas. So yes, I'm full on working group proponent.
Yeah, Ifeoma, I'm actually curious if I could add on here. What advice would you give to someone that may not have these happening on their teams? Like, what do you say are like the first two things that they need to get the ball rolling here?
In order to implement a working group?
Yeah.
I think the first thing is to think about, how do you address that in a group space, right? It really was, we have our biweekly program meetings, and I just added it as an agenda item. So if you are yourself are not a manager, but you're interested in potentially starting a working group in your team, I would, one, email your manager, reach out to your manager, offer that idea, and then plan to share it at your team meeting, team group space. And just really get folks who are interested to volunteer. I think that's the first step, is to float that idea out there, and see who's interested. And then from there, I think the second most important thing is to think about, what does the meeting cadence look like? What do we want the structure of this team, this working group to look like? And what are our ultimate goals? Being able to flesh that out in a document to make sure that everyone's on the same page is so key for the success of that working group.
Yeah, that clear alignment is necessary. And I think one thing that you point out here is, even if you're not a leader, like, you have the capability to get this collaborative environment flowing across your team. It's all about managing up and having those conversations. Awesome. Jalen, we did not forget about you.
Thank you. Coming from a talent perspective, I think, like, we've all had really, really great interview processes. We've all had really, really frustrating interview processes. And one thing that I really love about our team here is that we listen to feedback often, and we look at data often. And so one of the pieces of data that we saw a lot of, for example, working parents dropping off in our process. And we really wanted to step back and ask ourselves why that was. And so in thinking around, like, the trends and things, and looking at the specific feedback people were giving us, we noticed that we were doing a lot of, like, hurry up and wait, rushing people to get into the next interview, rushing people to finish a task, without really stepping back and being like, how is this actively affecting people who are caregivers or people who have jobs outside of this process? And so we really had a moment of bringing more people in and having hard conversations, and specifically addressing our own biases and our own perspectives, and changed our interview process to make it shorter, to make it fewer rounds, to ask less of people as they were moving through, and rethought all of the information that we thought we needed to decide if someone would be a great fit here. And so I think it's so much about that. It's not just looking at the data beforehand, but bringing in those new voices, listening to feedback, and then measuring those changes against the data post those changes.
Yeah, I love this idea of, like, really bringing in that diversity of feedback and then returning to it and seeing, have we actually met the goals that we wanted to achieve there, which I think is so effective, and kudos to you and your team. I want to move on here, and I'm thinking a little bit around like we've talked a bit about building team culture has sort of come up and work across teams. So I'm curious, Chin and Ifoma, like why does it matter to be so intentional about building a team culture that's inclusive or welcoming of all? And I'm curious, you both have been leaders in your own right. How have you been able to do this successfully so far? Chin, let's start with you this time.
Yes, thanks so much. I think this is a really good question. I want to first go back to my tip. So the tip that I'm sharing, I'm actually sharing two. The first one is collaboratively building systems for team communication. And I want to pause there for a moment and just challenge you all to quickly think about a moment in which you asked a question that went against the status quo. 9 times out of 10, if you've ever done that and you felt confident in doing so, it was because you felt included on the team or the project that you were working on. To take such a risk requires there to be a foundation of inclusion and belonging, right? And so I want to set the stage with that and then step back for a little bit to answer that question, Richard. When I'm thinking about why inclusion matters on teams, it is because one, we know that based on just some research from Deloitte, like teams that are considered to be a lot more inclusive are twice as likely to meet or exceed their financial targets. They're 3 times as likely to be rated as high performing, and then 6 times more likely to be considered innovative and agile. Those moments have to be captured within teams, but also quantified, of course, right? And when we're thinking about the bottom line, it is going to always stem from teams in which all members feel like they can take a chance, step up and say something. It's also going to come from teams where people are gelling and getting along and getting work done. And so we know that these are like premium ingredients that has to be a part of any inclusive strategy. I'll pass it on to you, Ifoma.
And dropping gems and stats as always. I appreciate you sharing that and thinking about this idea of the importance of folks gelling. I think the benefit of creating a workplace culture where folks feel like they belong is that, and it sounds cliche, right? It's you bring out the best in people and it really helps people find a voice. And I'm a firm believer that you don't have to bring your full self to work, right? But you do have to bring a part of yourself that feels authentic, that allows you to develop into the professional that you want to be, and that also allows you to build a nurturing and uplifting and authentic work community, right? And so I think a workplace culture that prioritizes belonging also helps people to find their voice, find their lane, cultivate their superpowers, right? People who are tapped into their unique superpowers are what creates that's where we get the Avengers and the Justice Leagues, right? It's everyone in their own lane. And so something that we've done recently as part of my team is we've had folks fill out what are called user manuals. Other folks may know it as ways of working documents, but it's an activity we give to our apprentices when they first start, right? It's an opportunity to reflect on who are they, what are their values, how do they work, really tap into that, and then share that openly with the people that they work with. And so we've implemented that recently where we all took some time to fill out the user manual, share that with each other. And that's just a first step in just saying, this is who I am, and this is what I'm coming to this workplace team with. And just being able to share that at the very beginning is such a first step in saying, this is the type of team that I would like to be a part of, and this is what I'm bringing to that team.
I think you both bring up such great points, right? I remember when I was moving into a teacher role, my mentor used to always say, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think adults feel the exact same way, right? Like that true and authentic showing of care, I think, is so crucial in Ifoma. Shout out to you and your team for work you're doing with your apprentices and your team to really have that ways of working, or say here's who I am and how can I fit into what this team is. I think you're clearly articulating be like, come as you are, right? We want you here. And I think, Chin, as you're talking, if we think about pies, right? Like, what are those ingredients to those pies that are so good and are so meaty? And if you think about those teams that are most successful, they're doing all those things, right? They want people to feel happy. They want people to come and work hard, because you're only going to work hard with folks that you like, right? And I think that's like a really important thing that is necessary here. Thank you so much for sharing that. Those are just so helpful. I'd love to sort of move now to think about like actual strategies, right? And you all have shared so many strategies here, but when we're thinking about these strategies, obstacles can come up and things can get in the way, and we might have to pivot or move forward. So I'm curious, Jalen and Tobes, like, what obstacles have you encountered or have your team encountered in your efforts to implement this inclusive strategy that you mentioned? And I think in particular, while implementing this tip that you recommended, could you potentially share like any critical questions that you've asked yourself to navigate or overcome these challenges that others might also find really valuable in asking themselves from the top as they sort of think about implementing your tip?
For sure. Richard, I love this question because I think it's obstacles, exactly what you said, are inevitable. And Ifoma, I love that you touched so much on delegation because that's a big part of it. There's this concept in scale ups that my team talks about a lot, which is giving away your Legos, which is this idea of like when you first start building something new, you know, you're doing everything, it's super exciting, you're building things up from scratch. But as you scale and grow and bring more people in, inevitably you have to give away these parts of your job, these things that you've done. And inevitably with that, people will make changes and improve things over time. And one of the big obstacles that it can be kind of hard to watch someone do something a little bit different with your baby, right? With this thing that you created. And so part of like DEI, part of that, of course, is bringing new people in. But with that comes addressing your own moments of like, oh, wait, but that's not the way that I would do it. And so in thinking around some of the work that I think what really pushes it forward is that like people wrangling, that asking those critical questions of yourself, like, what do I risk by not bringing other people in, and being really honest with yourself around the answer to that.
It is so helpful. And I remember when I first read that article around Legos, like giving up your Legos can be really hard, but it's necessary to do. And asking those questions are super helpful. Tobes, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. See you smiling a bit there. So I think you might be you might be dropping some gems right now.
All I can say is that really resonated. You're speaking directly to me. I know I really appreciated that point. I think obviously we all build inclusive teams, diverse teams, because we know in a selfish way that the team's going to be pretty awesome. So we kind of want to win anyway, but also it's the right thing to do and it's the way things should work. But coming back to my overarching point of being big and loud about victories, I think one of the biggest probably development points for myself over being a young leader and coming into a business like Multiverse is we can win, we can succeed. That's all fantastic. But when I'm going to be big and loud about my victories, I need to be speaking the same language as everyone. Otherwise, I may as well be out in the hills somewhere just screaming into the distance and and it'll land exactly the same. So something I've really been kind of focusing on, getting advice on, working on, really trying to instill into the members of my team as well, as I kind of encourage them to be their own masters of PR as well, is okay, you've had this fantastic victory, you've used your strengths, you've brought this benefit to my team, this benefit to your career, this benefit to the larger department, fantastic. You're communicating to this group of people how amazing you are, and I know you're amazing, but now it's down to you to convert all of those messages into something, a package that those people really going to care about and really understand. There's no point in me telling someone how fantastic this project is that we're working on if they have nothing to do with it. It won't impact their lives in any way, shape, or form. And also, there's no kind of impact on the way that they work either. I mean, you're going to get some people that will because they're fantastic, but there's no need for them to. So what I'm really kind of trying to drill home as a point, as a learning point, as a tip, is that when you're being big and loud about your successes, the obstacle that you're going to have is converting that into a language for the person you're trying to talk to. So in terms of questions, Richard, that you were asking for, you really need to sit down and think, what does this person care about? What does this person do? Who is this person? How can I leverage, but also make the most of the relationship that I have with this person? Because otherwise, I mean, they have no reason to pay attention to how amazing you are.
That is so helpful, and I think, you know, as you think about whether you're an IC, an individual contributor, or you're a manager, like these are questions that you should be asking, right? Chen, go for it.
Yes, thanks. I really appreciate what you just said, Tobes. Just thinking about like people as an individual, thinking about a person, and considering who they are, what experiences they bring to the table. I think that goes with the other tip that I'm sharing, just around being really people first, right? And when I'm thinking about a people first culture, I'm thinking about a few elements such as putting employees' well-being first, prioritizing their job satisfaction, or even just committing to their professional growth and putting that at the forefront of everything that they do. These are all opportunities that we could take full advantage of when we're considering building an inclusive environment and really looking at people for as a person. And I think I seen Richard's head nodding, right? When we're thinking about who is in front of me, what experiences do they have, how do they fit into this puzzle? When we're doing that type of deep work, we're really allowing ourselves and our teams to thrive. And I think that's what I hope to see more of. I hope to see workplaces in which each individual has something that they're known for. I think Ifoma mentioned it as a superpower. And I think just being able to have that conversation on the front end when you're working with someone new, or even the people that you're currently working with, recognizing their strengths and their weaknesses and being able to have a plan in action, I think that's really going to move us. And that's what I hope to see soon.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Chin, that you name that, right? Because at the end of the day, like the folks serving in those roles or managing those projects or doing those tasks are people, right? And if we aren't catering to their person, what they bring to that space, whether it's a Zoom room or it's a physical room, we're leaving out so much opportunity to really support and drive results, right? If you really want to think about achieving strong results, the teams that are doing that are people and teams who know each other, right? And are invested in each other and can play at each other's strengths and their weaknesses, right? Like sometimes another person's weakness is your strength and you can partner with them and really collaborate, but you won't know that unless you truly invest the time in getting to know that individual versus, you know, not, right? And thinking about it's just the metric, you aren't achieving, we aren't going, which is so powerful, and that was just so great to hear. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear from everyone here because I am selfishly thinking about just my work scope and some things that I want to take away here. But you all have such fabulous tips and strategies that you all have implemented on your teams and are currently leading on. But I'm curious, how has your team benefited from implementing the practice that you shared? And this is kind of an opportunity for you to gloat and share what has like actually come out of it. But I selfishly want to hear some of your wins as well. So I'm going to start with Tobes here, and then folks can just feel free to just sort of chime in. But I'd love to hear from everyone.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, actually. And this is something that I'm quite bad at, which is actually reflecting on the successes. It's so easy just to fly through them and then focus on the next thing that you need to achieve. But I think from trying to build a really inclusive culture in my team, where I can be big and loud about the successes and the victories of individuals and the collective, I think what's happened is I've managed to, so for broader context, I kind of grew my team by 200% over the time that I've been here. And I was very intentional who was hired. I knew their strengths. I make an effort to know what they're fantastic at. Then I kind of nudge them gently into those things and things that I know they're either going to really grow into or they're just going to fly with. And two of the members of my team that kind of been doing that with have been promoted into other roles where they've been able to now fly and go do those things. Sadly, outside of my team, I was torn whether I wanted to hold them back and keep them, but I had to let them go. But I mean, that's just a constant process for me, trying to find areas of success for my team that I can push them into, and then sadly letting them fly off into the distance and be successful somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think one thing that I'd love to sort of double tap on here is the fact that when folks on your team win, when you're a leader, you're winning, right? And it's not about making someone look good or look better, but it's all about what are we as a collective achieving? And I think oftentimes folks really forget about that aspect, right? It's like, what am I achieving in my role? And my direct reports aren't achieving this, or they aren't doing this. It's really the opposite, right? And I think that that's a really great way. And congratulations to you and your team on achieving that. Ifoma.
I thank you for sharing that, Tobes, and I especially love this idea of you cultivate such a culture and a team that it allows people to really discover their lane, right? So my tip was about highlighting collective expertise. And as a leader on a team, I don't always have to be the person with the answers, right? Even though there's a temptation to want to, as a manager, to answer everything. And so when you create an environment where you're highlighting best practices, or instead of answering the questions, you're directing team members to other team members who have a specific expertise, you are also creating that space for them to really develop in their lane and potentially pursue opportunities that help to nurture that passion or those really great skills and expertise that they have. And so I think I've seen that in terms of members of my team, Chin, for example, like growing into the DEI space, right? Or being part of different initiatives in the organization, knowing what they do well, and then having them volunteer for different initiatives, different pods, different things that are really interesting projects that are happening in the organization, and just also tapping into what are their goals, their future aspirations. I myself, that like combination of expertise, but also knowing what they really want to develop into, I can then position them into like taking advantage of those opportunities and making sure to champion them in rooms that they're not in, right? And so I think that's that really getting to that part of what does this team member do really well? How do I position them in a place where they can continue to share that with other members of the team? How do I step back? And then how do I step forward to champion them when they're not there?
That is such a great point. And I think perfectly connects to what Chin shared earlier, right? About this idea of all of those beautiful ingredients that go into that pie. If we're able to walk into a room and someone is sharing a problem, knowing your team, right? And sort of to your point too, Tobes, like really like celebrating folks in those areas where they are strong and are not, be able to name that. And I'm so glad to hear that that's something that you're really fostering across your team. I'd love to pass it over to Chin, because this sort of ties perfectly into what you were sharing earlier. How about you?
Yes. So the tip that I'm sharing, again, I have two. I'm going to focus on one right now, and that is collaboratively building systems for team communication, right? There's so much space for inclusivity just in comms alone. And so one of the ideas and practices that we've actually rolled out is an inclusive meeting checklist. And essentially, that inclusive meeting checklist will take care of the before, the during, and after the meeting to really serve all people, but specifically those who may have some additional needs. Okay, for instance, as myself, a person who identifies with ADHD, it could be extremely helpful to have before the meeting the resources, the agenda sent ahead of time, any pre-reads. That allows me to really, really focus in and be present during the meeting. Right. And then just thinking about this inclusive meeting checklist, we can also think about during the meeting. There are so many individuals who could benefit just from having captions turned on, right? There's so many accessibility tools, especially in this day and age, that we have access to And just by quickly unlocking those and operationalizing them, we create access and a space for everyone to be able to thrive. And then as I'm considering after the meeting, how many times have you had a meeting and completely forgot what was shared, or you forgot some important points, or you didn't know what action steps were required of you? But by simply having that follow-up email with a recording, with maybe notes, right? All these things, we are setting everyone up for success. And when you are thinking about inclusion, that should be the goal. How do we get everyone to thrive, right? Um, that's one form of like using communication. Another one that comes to mind that we do really well here at Multiverse is we have these randomized coffee chats. And so not sure if you all are using Slack or any other instant messaging system, but the one we use is Slack. And randomly, we're paired with a person to have a 15-minute coffee chat. And I'm making an effort to not talk about work. Just get to know the person in front of you. And that connects with the second tip that I have, which is creating that people-centered culture. And when you're considering, okay, this person is from Nebraska, what are some things you do in Nebraska? What are you interested in doing? Did you grow up there? We just have to do a lot better at just relationship building. And I think we wrap it up into this very difficult thing around like the inclusion umbrella, but it's a simple thing. It's just getting to know people. It's people being people. And I think the better we get at just having random conversations, getting to know people, remembering these things, being able to connect with someone who you remember, maybe Thanksgiving is their favorite holiday. And so just before the holidays, you send a quick message. These are small things that really lead to tremendous outcomes. And it really builds the synchronicity between in teams. And when we're looking at the research, we know that all of these things lead to the top producing teams. And I think that's the goal here when I think about inclusion.
Seriously agree with all of what you just shared here, right? This people-centered approach is really showing up in both of those tips that you shared, Chen. So thank you so much for that. Jalen, I'd love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about talent is like we're building teams, right? We're partnering with the hiring managers and leaders to build teams. And one thing that we know is that diverse teams build diverse teams, right? When you're bringing in more people that are coming from different backgrounds, have different experiences, have different perspectives, they tend to challenge the way that things are and ask the hard questions and engage in those discussions that only help to bring in more people. So on my team, like as we've addressed the biases, as we've created the space to do so and had the hard conversations, it's only created a more diverse workplace for everyone at Multiverse.
That is so helpful. And I love that thought process around talent, right? Like you are the one building the team. So you really are holding that. We're now going to move into our Q&A portion. So thank you all so much for answering the questions that I had prepared for you there. And thank you all so much. Please keep your questions coming in the chat. We got so many good ones here. So I'm actually going to go to back to you, Jalen, for our first question here. And our question is as follows. When it comes to team culture, how important is it to tune into the team and ensure the onboarding and employee appreciation packages are reviewed regularly to fit the growing or diversifying office culture?
So incredibly important to kind of summarize everything that I'm about to say. In looking back 2 years ago to my onboarding at Multiverse, there was a question which was, would you be okay receiving alcohol as like an employee appreciation package? And that was the first time in any onboarding process I had ever been asked that. And it was this moment of like, they're being quite considerate of all of their employees by asking that first. And I think just having those moments where you're not just like assuming what everyone would love. For example, I once had a job benefit where I got a monthly package to Dry Bar, which for those of you that don't know is a hair salon that does not know how to do my hair. And just getting feedback from employees often around what they would hope to see, reflecting on what they have been using and have not been using, and just generally how they can still find new ways that you can appreciate them and what they really want to see in celebrations. And so again, to double stamp, incredibly important. Ask for feedback often and then act on that feedback.
That is so helpful. And I also remember answering that question when I first joined Multiverse and was very happy that I was asked that question as well. I'm going to go to Ifoma and Tobes, who are both current managers on our team or on our panel here. And I'm curious, what strategy have Multiverse managers, and maybe you can speak to a little bit of your own, put in place to ensure that the team has a sense of inclusivity?
That's a really good question. I think the good thing about being a manager here at Multiverse is you're often trusted to be an expert in your field. So you're kind of given a lot of free rein in terms of how you want to manage your own individual team, which means that a small plug, you can then use the five tips that we've all provided for you, because that's the way you want to run your team. I think for me, I had a lot of freedom because I was building my own team relatively from scratch. It was quite a small number, then it became a very big number. And I was able to really put my stamp on what I wanted the process to look like in terms of hiring. I was able to really assess and analyze the gap that was in my team and then fill it with who I used my expertise to judge was the person to fill that gap most appropriately. And I think, looping back to the question, the autonomy in leading your team and building your team's culture, tapping into support if you need it, but being able to do it yourself has really been actually the biggest thing for the managers, which has then meant that in turn we can use all of these tips and tools and things we know, things we learn from mentors, things we learn from just people you pass in the office. We can employ all of those things in our line, our groups, our teams work, and the way we just do one-to-ones, daily stuff as well.
I really love that piece about the autonomy. I think Multiverse definitely encourages that with guidance right from our people team. I think as part of the delivery team, which the delivery team is made up of coaches and program leads, something that we continuously push for is to have coaches drive their development, right? So it's not just as a manager, as a program lead, I'm imparting on you the path that I think you should go into, right? So for each data meeting, which is where coaches review data related to their apprentices, and for each development meeting, coaches are the ones that put together the agendas. They're the ones that are really highlighting things that they want to discuss in each meeting, and that's logged and tracked and built on over the course of the professional relationship. And I think that's such a key thing for inclusivity, where it's the direct report, the employee that's driving the conversation, especially in terms of development. So it's these are the things I'm interested in. These are the projects that I'm working on. This is where I'd like to be, and this is the support that I need to get to that place. That's a first step in ensuring that folks not only are taking ownership of their development, but they feel like they're heard, and it really creates a more inclusive team culture.
Yeah, those are both such helpful responses here. And I think really pushing this idea that, you are welcomed here, right? Show up as you are and bring what you want to be developed on, I think is so key. And Toby, just hearing you speak more about like, what does an actual interview process look like in terms of how I'm able to get those folks, I think is so key. This is a question that I'm really interested to hear folks' answers on. I'm going to come back to you, Ifoma, and I'm going to ask Chin to also pop in here. But in your opinion, what is the most underestimated aspect of cultivating an inclusive team culture, and how can we give it the attention it deserves?
Yes, excellent question. I think communication opportunities. Every interaction is an opportunity for us to build in inclusion. One really good example is icebreakers. I don't know about you all, but here at Multiverse, we do a really good job of starting meetings with icebreakers, some type of activation strategy. And that's an opportunity for us to connect. On the delivery team, one that comes to mind is Would You Rather? And so just to give you a quick idea of what this looks like, we're all on a virtual meeting. We see a screen that is split between two sides. Maybe it could be, would you rather go to a vacation to Jamaica, or would you rather visit the Taj Mahal, right? And everyone has an opportunity to answer in the chat. And then the facilitator would ask one person from each side, right? Hey, just come off mute, share your thoughts. What was your thinking behind this? And the cool thing there is, one, we're bonding, we're creating an opportunity for people to share their experiences based on their preferences. And most importantly, and I think this is the most important piece, we establish a culture where everyone's opinion and preference is respected, right? And that ground rule has to exist in order to have a psychological safety. Otherwise, people would not feel, inclined to answer these icebreakers. And so I would definitely turn it back to that. Use every opportunity to build in inclusion.
Yeah, I love that, Chin, right? Focusing on those low stakes, high impact moments on your team is key, right? Like saying, would you rather have apple pie or pumpkin pie is like such a silly question, but it does allow for debate, right? Like, I think that's like something that is just super helpful to hear. Ifoma.
I think an underestimated part is this idea that everyone at work needs to be an extrovert. There's this really interesting thing about, we are in a work setting. It is very public facing. We have to interact with other folks. But so there's an assumption that you're coming into this environment as an extrovert, right? That we don't talk about the fact that meetings, if you're an introvert, meetings drain you, right? Or that you need some time to you need a buffer time between meetings to get energy and to like feel like yourself again. But it's not something that we typically talk about, and it's not something that managers really ask of their employees. And as an introvert, that's something that was important to me, right? To actually share that, yeah, I'm not someone that feels energized by being in meetings. I need that time. And so it's important for you as a manager to be able to ask that of your employees. Are you an extrovert or introvert, right? What feeds you? What energizes you? What do you prefer in terms of, our meeting schedule, right? I think those are all things to consider. And it's important for you as a manager to encourage your direct reports or even your teammates to share that openly. But I've found that that's not something that's really talked about and should be talked about, especially in a work setting.
Yeah, that's so helpful. When I was a previous school leader, I would actually have all of my direct reports complete the 16 personalities website, which it gives you all of your personality, right? Are you introvert, extrovert, all these different bits. And the first conversation or second conversation was all centered around that. So I love that, Ifoma, right? Like who you are innately is going to show up at work, and your job as a leader or as a teammate is to ensure that everyone can fit in and really like match whatever that style is. So I absolutely love that. We received two questions that are sort of similar. So I'm going to merge them both together, but this is really can be answered by any of you on our panel, because I think you all have really strong insights here. But folks are curious, can you share how someone can overcome the fear of possible resistance, pushback, or professional repercussions, such as being blacklisted or not, or being hindered from job opportunities due to speaking up about contentious issues related to diversity, equity, culture, in particular on the team? Curious to hear folks' thoughts there. Anyone can sort of share their thoughts.
I'll jump in. I think, first of all, I'd like to recognize that, yeah, that can be super, super scary, especially because we've probably all got a background of where we've addressed things like this before, and it's not gone in the loveliest way possible, or it wasn't the most pleasant conversation in the entire world. And then you automatically are a little bit skeptical about having, or hesitant to have that sort of conversation again, in case that sort of experience happens again. I think the reason you want to have that conversation in the first place is the reason you're going to have that conversation. So really taking time to reflect, challenging yourself on why is this something that needs to be challenged? Why is this something that we need to think about, that needs to change, that isn't exactly how it should be? And why do I believe that? Because if your beliefs aren't strong, if it's not something you actually really believe in, the chances are, A, you're not going to have that conversation. B, the slightest friction, you're then going to run away from the conversation. And I think chances are you're going to be so convicted in your beliefs and the fact that whatever it is you're raising needs to change, that you're going to be able to drum up the bravery to have this conversation, but you need to drum up the bravery and channel it into a constructive way to communicate with the person you're having that conversation with. And then looping it all the way back to what Chin and I have said before is it has to be people first. This person is not going to listen to your point if the way you bring it up has nothing to do with anything they care about, whether that's right or wrong. And I think we know the answer to that. I think you need to remember that you're, at the end of the day, communicating to someone that has needs, that has things to get done, and has things they care about. And so having those conversations for them to go the best that they possibly can, you need to make sure that it's delivered in the right way. You believe in what you're talking about. And also, you're going to need to kind of know what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tobes. I like to jump in here as well. When I'm thinking about any type of fears around raising awareness around these issues, there are a few things that come to mind. The first one is how you package your argument or your concern, rather, right? And I think the first thing is just being really specific on one problem. I think just reflecting on my own experiences, I could definitely get a bit overwhelmed and kind of gather and group so many problems, right, into one moment. But I would really first zero in on one particular problem and really use that people-centered approach to consider this question. Who is it impacting? How is it impacting, right? And then, of course, what are some recommendations or solutions that you may have in mind? True action steps, right? I think being able to share both sides, here's what I'm thinking, here are the people or groups that it's impacting, here's what that impact looks like. Also, here's some solutions or recommendations. I think that is really where we could have a lot of opportunity for building inclusion within our organizations. And then again, I could be wrong. I'm not in your organization. I don't know everything. But one of the things I would challenge is, are these fears stemming from previous situations, other interactions? And if so, building a safe space to have that conversation as well could be really helpful. And also getting down to that one specific challenge and that one specific recommendation or solution could be get you out of a rut.
That is so helpful. Thank you so much, Chin. And thank you all so much for your questions. We are coming up at time here. So our panelists, I'd love to ask you all one final question that I'm going to be jotting down some notes as you all share your answers to. But I'd love for you to restate the tip that you shared today that has been the trend throughout everything that you have shared. And then secondly, how can everyone in today's audience start actioning on this today? Let's start with Jalen.
For sure. My tip was around like creating spaces to talk about, to address the root of, and really take action on bias. And really what that looks like is looking inside first, and then creating a space and a structure and a time for people outside of yourself, on your team, on the greater team, to really have those conversations.
Thanks. Topes.
Yeah, so mine was centered around the idea of being big, loud, and bold about your victories, making sure you're celebrating them really loud about them. And that was the idea of your collective victories and your individual victories positioning people as well as you can for them, knowing people well enough so that there are the victories, there's a safe space, so you can be victorious as a team, but then externally making sure you and those that are victorious are sharing it in the best way possible and the most effective way possible as well.
Ifoma?
So my tip was around cultivating collective expertise on the team, individual and collective expertise. And I think one of the many ways you can do this is making the sharing of best practices a regular practice at team meetings. Another way is to, create a document where folks are inputting their superpowers. And the third way is as a leader to ensure that you don't have to be the person that's answering the questions, right? You can direct team members to other team members who have that expertise and who could also develop that leadership on their own.
Amazing. And our king with 2 tips, Chin.
Thanks so much. The first tip, build systems for team communication. When I'm thinking about how to quickly action on this, I'm thinking, go ahead and roll out an inclusive meeting checklist. Think about accessibility tools that you can implement. Have some randomized coffee chats, 15 minutes, a person you never met, just discussing life outside of work. And really, really take full ownership of those icebreaker opportunities. And then to the next point, develop people first practices. Really consider the person that you are working with, what matters to them, who they are. Get a little personal here. Also, just think about, how do I walk alongside you on your professional journey and support you?
Mic has been dropped. I hope that everyone that joined us today got to take away at least something that resonates with them or that they're able to implement immediately. I want to send so much gratitude to the beautiful Black multiversers here on our screen. Thank you so much for your preparation for today, for engaging with everyone here. And I hope that everyone has a fantastic end to their Thursday if you are across the pond. And for our folks here in the US, I hope that you have a beautiful afternoon. But thank you all so much. You will receive the information of the recording following this. Take care.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Bye.
Well, thank you.